I'm Kieran Lynch and welcome to OviCast, the Teagasc Sheep podcast. Each episode will bring you latest insights, advice and technical updates for the sheep industry. We're joined this week by postgraduate student Lisa McGrane and Dr. Philip Creighton to discuss the results of an ongoing study between Teagasc and UCD examining how companion forages, namely chicory, plantain, red and white clover, perform alongside a perennial ryegrass sward in sheep systems. Now, with 4 years data collected, Lisa discusses what impact these forages have had on ewe and lamb performance. We move on to discuss the impact this has had on drafting, concentrate supplementation and carcass specification. Keeping some of these forages in the sward can prove challenging, and Philip discusses this in more detail, as well as some of the aspects they are examining in Athenry that may help improve the persistency. Finally, with the upcoming Technical Open Day in Athenry Research Centre looming, Philip explains how this is an ideal opportunity to hear more about Lisa's work and from the other ongoing studies in Teagasc. We start off, however, with Lisa giving us a bit of background to the project.
So I'm a PhD student based in conjunction with Teagasc and UCD here in Teagasc and Athenry, and my project looks at, it's called the addition of a companion forage to a perennial ryegrass sward on ewe and lamb performance. So basically, over a 4-year period from 2018 to 21, we are evaluating sward types such as perennial ryegrass plus white clover, perennial ryegrass plus red clover, perennial ryegrass plus plantain, or perennial ryegrass plus chicory, and then comparing that to a perennial ryegrass only sward. And we're looking at sward performance and animal performance on those sward types.
So Lisa, in each of those there is a standard perennial ryegrass and one companion forage, and of course there's a control of just perennial ryegrass.
Yeah, that's right.
So you've that in for 4 years. Look, we've had you on the podcast before and you give us a good bit of background to that project. You have a lot of animal performance data collected over the last couple of years. I know you're presenting some of that at the upcoming Sheep Open Day. You might just take us through briefly in terms of performance, and I suppose this is where this companion forage has an interest and a role in improving performance. What kind of impact has that had on growth rate of lambs up to weaning?
Yeah, so over the 4 years we followed the lamb performance over in each of the 4 years, and over the 4 years what we've seen is there's definitely an improvement in animal performance when you're including one of the companion forages that we've mentioned. The types of results that we're seeing over the lifetime of the lamb with the inclusion of a companion forage, we're getting increased performance up to between 17 and 31 grams per day. So the lambs on the companion forages are gaining 17 to 31 grams per day more than those on the grass only sward. And we're seeing that that's getting the lambs finished faster. So the days to slaughter, how many days it's taken for those lambs to get to the adequate slaughter weight, is reduced by between 16 and 28 days in comparison to a grass only sward.
You've also looked at this in ewes. So is it ewe milk yield that is driving that improvement in growth rate?
Interestingly, when we look at the lamb performance, we've definitely seen an increase in lamb performance in the post-weaning period, but not as much in the pre-weaning period. And I guess that's backed up then by the results that we've seen in ewe milk yield. So we haven't really seen any differences in ewe milk yield based on the sward type that the ewe is grazing. And I guess that, I suppose, maybe is the answer as to why we're not seeing the same levels of animal performance benefits in the pre-weaning period as we are in the post-weaning period.
Yeah, again, because it's largely dependent on milk yield and that's driving a lot of the diet. I suppose, Lisa, the other element of that too is they have different growth patterns than our perennial ryegrasses. So is it in part maybe the sward composition during the year? Do we see as much of these herbs and legumes in the early part of that season versus post-weaning?
Yeah, so I think that's definitely a factor. So for example, particularly the clovers are quite sensitive to the temperature, and they need a higher temperature to start growing than a ryegrass sward would. And so we do see a seasonal trend in, say, the proportion of clover in the sward across the year. So in the early spring, you'll have very low levels of clovers in that sward, and in the pre-weaning period you will have low levels of clover in the sward, whereas that's increasing over the year, and you will have much higher levels of clovers, for example, in the post-weaning period, and perhaps that's the reason that's driving the increase in performance in the post-weaning period.
So Lisa, what kind of grazing management are you implementing on this? What are you even going at pre-grazing, post-grazing heights in the pre and post-weaning period?
Yeah, so for the purpose of the experiment, I guess we have to treat all the swards equally. So we're having a rotational grazing in the pre-weaning period where we're grazing to 4.5 centimetres. In the post-weaning period, then we use a leader-follower system where the lambs graze ahead of the ewes down to 6 centimetres, and then the ewes come in straight away afterwards and they graze down to 4.5 centimetres again.
It's a fairly standard grazing management practice.
Yeah.
And look, when we're talking about post-weaning period, look, concentrate costs have gone up. That's one of the big challenges. Improving post-weaning performance is something you've seen. What has been the difference? Like, you're going to have a fairly standard drafting weight here across it. How has that changed during the year? And is it fairly consistent across the year, that increase in performance?
Yeah, so it's fairly consistent, the differences between the proportion of lambs drafted between the groups over the course of the year. What we do here in Athenry is obviously similar to a commercial farm. We graze the lambs as much as possible on the forages and on the crops in our pasture across the year, and then at the end of the year, in around October time, whatever proportion of lambs haven't been finished at that point are housed, and they're housed and finished on a concentrate diet. And when we looked at the proportions of concentrates fed to the different groups over the 4 years, we've seen that on average, as a result of the lambs on the forages finishing faster, they're receiving a lower level of concentrates, an average 6 to 11 kilos less concentrates per head on a lamb which is finished on mixed sward type compared to the grass only.
So you're killing a set carcass weight of 20 kilos or so, and basically because you've more of them drafted, you have less meal to put into that system.
Yeah, absolutely, and that would be a huge saving financially.
It would, of course. And look, I suppose the housing there, we have to bear in mind it's a research study, so it might necessarily be what you would do on commercial level, but that improvement in performance has got rid of a lot more lambs out of that system earlier.
Absolutely, yeah.
So just in terms of the carcass of those lambs, like you've looked at that as well, is there much difference in conformation or fat score or kill out on the different crops versus perennial ryegrass?
So no, we have followed carcass conformation, fat score and kill out percentages, and we haven't seen any difference among the different sward types. We haven't seen any difference in those measures in the lamb performance.
So it's pretty consistent. Philip, I'm going to bring you in at this point. Like up to now, like as Lisa's indicated, we've improvements in performance, particularly in that post-weaning period that we really want to get lambs moving. And it's potentially an area that's a bit more challenging. One of the questions that often comes up with this is, will these herbs and legumes last in sward? Like we know what white clover we spoke about before can be challenging. Do you see similar challenges with these other herbs and legumes, and how long will they last in system?
Yeah, so absolutely, Kieran, it's a massive challenge, and I suppose yes, our experience with them in this study would suggest that some of the forages are going to last longer than others. I suppose what Lisa has presented there, our first objective with the trial was to see, well, if we have these forages in the sward, will it bring animal performance benefits? And as Lisa has outlined, the answer is absolutely yes. The next challenge then is to maintain that level of performance in the longer term. And I suppose the way we've gone about that is that we've learned from, I suppose, how some of the forages behaved from 2018 onwards. Some of them were starting to drop off quicker than others. And as part of Lisa's studies then as well, what we've done is in a kind of a side study to the main systems grazing work, we've put in a lot of plot component type studies looking at some of the things that might influence the, I suppose, the initial establishment and the plant stand and how much is in the sward from day one, and then how that might be influenced by how that might influence the persistency over time. So some things like that, we're talking about, the initial establishment method, the initial seeding rate, and that's both seeding rate in terms of the seeding rate of the companion forage, but also the seeding rate of the grass. And I suppose one thing we're kind of learning is that maybe our traditional mixes, maybe we're putting too much grass into the mixture, and it's creating too much of a challenge for the companion forage. So we need to look at that, maybe giving them a little bit more space to get that little bit stronger in the early days, and that may help with persistency. And then I suppose another question that we have and are often asked is maybe the severity of grazing, particularly on the herbs, we'll say, or red clover for that matter, which traditionally wouldn't have been used in grazing settings. We're looking at the different grazing severities there in terms of different post-grazing heights. And look, we don't really have answers on those things at the moment. We're in motion, and I suppose Lisa is very busy trying to work her way through some of that data now as well. There's 2 or 3 years worth of data for some of those aspects as well. But I suppose those are some of the issues that would be maybe relevant, and potentially we can, by changing our management or manipulating some of those factors, we may be able to increase the longevity of the sward and maintain these, very obvious animal performance benefits for longer.
It's going to be a challenge, Philip, and as you said, it might just be a case of tweaking some of the management, maybe increasing post-grazing sward height at different times of the year. But it is one of the challenges there, that performance benefit or savings that can be made could be potentially lost if we can't get them to persistent sward. So it's a very useful piece of work.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I suppose an important part of this is we'll be in a very good position in that we'll have animal data, we'll have sward data and component data to try and inform some of maybe why the reasons what we're seeing, and then we can, I suppose, pull the whole lot together and model both from a animal point of view, a sward point of view, but most importantly, I suppose, from a financial point of view, implications of these different systems in the longer term, as you say. Short term, we can see the results, but we need to be sure about what the longer term impacts are in terms of our advice.
Well, it's a very interesting bit of work. And look, for anyone who's listening to this podcast as it comes out, you have an opportunity to talk to Lisa and Philip about it a bit more at the open day. And Philip, you might just give us a bit of background to that.
Yeah, so we're having our Teagasc Sheep Open Day on the Saturday, the 18th of June, Kieran, from 10 o'clock in the morning to 4 o'clock in the afternoon. As you say, there'll be a lot of information on the grassland program and the forages program, but across the whole entire sheep research and advisory program, we'll have information there from all the different projects and programs that we're running. It'll be an opportunity for people to come in. I suppose the last 2 years we haven't been able to have our discussion group visits and that which we would have had in the past. So it's an opportunity for people to come in and meet the likes of Lisa, who has been working away here right throughout the lockdowns, gathering all this data and creating all this information. But maybe, a lot of people mightn't be aware of even some of these projects that are going on. So it's an opportunity for people to come in, see what's going on, ask questions, talk to everybody, and hopefully it'll be a good day out for everybody.
Definitely, it's well worth the visit. Nothing like seeing something like that in person. Listen, great having you both on. Lisa, thanks very much for coming back on with us. Philip, great having you on. Good information. Thanks, folks.
Thanks, Kieran.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to leave it there at this point. It's great to see that information coming out now, the impact it's having on animal performance. Hopefully we'll get Lisa on again to discuss some of the sward characteristics and persistency issues and how we might overcome them. As Philip has indicated, the Sheep Research Open Day is happening on the 18th of June. It's an excellent opportunity to meet Lisa, other members of the Sheep Research team, and see some of the ongoing work. I've included a link in the description where you get a bit more information about the upcoming Open Day. That's it for me for this episode. Again, for any updates on our sheep programme, keep an eye on our Twitter page at Teagasc Sheep. I'm Kieran Lynch. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe and get updated for any new episodes.